Hello, this is Paul, and this is the second unit, and we are getting now ready to establish a table. It is our database that is going to have a collection of different functions for this data that I'm going to be importing. There is a step to be able to establish our data into this format. And we're working with a spreadsheet that I developed of my music CDs to be able to know what they are. And in this, I have a player that holds 300 CDs. We are identifying this with the title and the artist and a disc number in a list of 300 that I can put in my player. In this player, I have the capability of sorting out these CDs, and I set up a mood for how I want to play them through different parts of the day. There might be times that I want it to be calm, much more for studying, whereas I have other CDs that are much more celebrative. So that is an explanation of why all these fields. We do have a title, an artist, a disc number, and different parts of what is established, and also for the mood. We established this structure because it is how it is laid out in my spreadsheet. And we're going to translate this into a database that is much more flexible for what I want to use, and we're going to establish our database in this fashion. Now, up to this point, we have done a lot of planning. We worked with a paper and pencil to be able to establish what we wanted to make with an effective database, and it took a lot of planning to get to this stage. So now we are ready to go into OpenOffice and make our database. As we go into OpenOffice now, we have our splash screen, and what our main interest is going to a database as one of the selections. Now, this display might be a little bit different from one computer to another, but it will all work the same. Now, the first thing that we need to realize that OpenOffice is going to assume that you want to make a selection of a database or create a new one. And I'd like to direct your attention to the left side of that box, and it is, first of all, we're into a wizard. There was much discussion in the past about what is a wizard. A wizard is a process or steps to be taken to create or do something as desired. In our case, we are talking about developing a database. So in the bigger section on the right, we do have the selection of what do you want to do. And in our case, we want to create a new database. Now, there's also selections there to open a database that is already created, or to use an external existing database that has been created by other programs. And those other programs can be DBase or Oracle or a whole selection of different databases that are on the market. It will make use of these databases as long as they are not too big. And that is an important thing to talk about, because anything more than a couple thousand records, then we will be going beyond the capabilities of OpenOffice, as it is related also to Microsoft Office. This is a very usable database program that has its limits. So be aware of what our purpose is. If we have a selection of a lot of CDs in our database, if you have a major collection like in a radio station, might have a listing of thousands or 100,000 of CDs of in the past as well as the present. This program might not be sufficient. However, for a typical home use, I'm sure that you're not going to have a room full of CDs and want to have them all stored in here. So now we're ready to proceed and develop a new database. We affirm our selection that we want to create a new database, and it will have a unique grouping of different files, and the first one is to create a table. And we need to establish that we want this registered with OpenOffice. And I need to get into some principles on this before we proceed. If we want to be able to use our database, we need to register it with OpenOffice. And in doing this, we will be able to add records or be able to make use of the data wherever we want. Now, to register this, we need to make this selection on our wizard. And if we don't select this, we are still able to register it in OpenOffice and be able to select the Tools menu for options and OpenOffice or databases, and we select to new and make our database usable in OpenOffice. It is a problem that we had in the original setting of our class, and we made a database and we never register it, so we weren't able to put any records in it. So it's very important that this gets registered. In the centered grouping of our window here, we are dealing with what we want our database to do. And of course, we want it to open and be able to use our database and be able to create tables or anything else we want in it. Now, the second part of it is to create a table where data is going to be stored. In this wizard, it'll take us directly into that process. After making our selections, we will be able to press the Finish button. There is no next, but it will take us into another window where we'll be able to save our work and establish our database. Remember that the database is going to be a collection of different files. It is not only the tables that we store our actual information, but we'll also store a file that we are able to have a special screen for input, also have reports for output, and be able to have different views. So be sure to take the steps. When you do save your file, by the way, make sure you give it a meaningful name, because when you go and develop other databases, it's going to be specific for what we have created, and we'll know what each database is about. So be sure to take care in the naming of your database, and also when we do our tables, they will have specific names as well. Don't forget to press the Save button and actually have it saved to the disk, and then we'll be able to develop our database in the next function. After establishing our database, we are ready to go and develop our first table. Since we made the selection to create a table right away, it will take us into that wizard. Our database presentation will flash very quickly before we go into the actual wizard to be able to develop our table. And take notice that since we have this wizard started now, we will have a list on the left-hand side which has the steps outlined. And they are to select fields, and also number 2, set types of formats is actually modifying this selection to our specific needs. And set primary key, we will be discussing that and how it will store our data in a specific order that we want. And after that, the creation of our table will take place. I now direct my attention to the right hand side of this window, which is the main part of the window, and I can see that there are two different categories for suggested databases to use. OpenOffice has designed this suggestion to be able to make it much easier to select a database of choice. And there is two groupings, and one is for business use and the other is personal use. Now, as we look at this, we are able to realize that by using the drop-down arrow, we see a selection of different ways to use a database. And the fields are already designed for us for each category. Now, I am not using a database here for business use, but I'm going to be using it for personal use. So I'm going to make my selection with the radio button from business, or I'm going to click on personal, and it'll change those listings there. As I use the drop down arrow, I will be able to see the selections that they have set up for me, and voila! I see I have something in there for a collection of CDs. After making my selection, the fields of suggestion is automatically changed over for what we might be interested in. But looking at the structure that we're looking to make, it's not going to really fit. So what we do is we select something to be able to be modified in another screen. And the way we do this is by highlighting the field of interest. For example, I do like the first field for it to be the album title. I will keep that. That looks pretty good. And then there are other selections along the way that we have as well. After making my selection of the album title, I take attention to the center of these where there are buttons to push, and a single arrow will take that single selection over to selected fields, and I will do that repeatedly until I have enough fields filled up for what I am interested to develop. Now, as we do this, don't worry if it's not an exact fit. We are going to make changes to each one of them so that it's going to be what we intend to have. Likewise, for each field of interest, I will do the same action over and over until I have 9 fields over there for modification. I will be able to change the names of it to fit our database of interest, and also have it storing information to the size that we're going to save a lot of disk space. Having a second look at these buttons that's in the center, take notice of the double arrow there. If you click on that double arrow button, either direction, either the second one down or the bottom one, it will move all of the suggested fields over at one clip. And we really don't want to do that. And that's why we make single selections at a time, or you can click on more than one and use the single arrow button to move them over together. It looks like we're about out of time again, and we are looking to have more information for you about how we're going to modify these fields that we have selected and make them fit our database in the order that it has to be. So be sure to go on to part 2, and we'll be able to complete this process.